Hello, folks. How is everybody? I hope we're all doing well. Thank you for coming to the show. As always, I will be answering questions that were pre submitted by my Patreon patrons and my channel members. So if you're watching right now and you're in the live chat and you want to ask a question or you have something you want me to talk about, etc., please hold those questions and comments, especially if you were going to be generous and throw in a super chat or something like that. Please hold that until I get through the patron and the member questions. So that way I will be more likely to see it, because when I'm doing answering the patron and member questions, I'm not always looking at the live chat. So I may miss something. So that being said, as always, thank you for joining me. And let's start out with the patron and member questions. And the first one comes from Stephen Sutton, greeting you here due to character count. Well, thank you, Stephen. That's very thoughtful of you. Watching the Parallel Earth episode raised questions in me. Number one, if the Enterprise pays a visit to us today as though we were the alternates, what would the episode's message of the week be? Two, you mentioned TNG's The Royale as a quasi-parallel Earth episode, which is a fun idea. While these episode archetypes are arbitrary and not mutually exclusive, may I submit that The Royale fits into another classic Star Trek premise almost perfectly, that of holodeck gone awry. If you ignore the lack of a holodeck, the tropes are all there. The episode writers use the situation as an excuse for an otherwise impossible setting. The characters enter a fictional simulation brought to life. They enjoy the novelty of the situation before they discover they can't exit. And best of all, the solution is to play out the fictional scenario to its narrative end. Maybe an overreach here, but if you accept the above conclusion, could you also make the same case for Inner Light? Two questions. Cheeky, I know. I had never thought of The Royale as a holodeck episode, but you're right. It matches all of the tropes perfectly. That's a really clever observation. That never occurred to me before, but you're spot on. And could you say the same for the Inner Light? I guess you could, except in the Inner Light, there isn't that moment of revelation and panic that you get in a holodeck episode, or that they get in the Royale when they go through the revolving door and they realize they can't leave. There's never really a moment in the Inner Light where Picard realizes he can't leave. There's a moment where he accepts that that is his real life, that that it's not, he thinks it's not a simulation or anything like that, and he just decides to go with it. But that's a little different than realizing that you want to leave and there is no escape because you're trapped there. He doesn't have that moment. He has a moment where it stops being a simulation to him and it just becomes his real life. But that's also kind of an interesting observation, that there are similar, similarities, I guess I should say. There are similarities between the Inner Light and a holodeck episode. But yeah, the Royale is, and I'm glad that they didn't make the Royale a holodeck episode. I feel like if the Royale had, because the Royale is one of my favorite episodes from the second season of TNG, and I think if they had made it a holodeck episode, it would have lost something. The fact that that hotel being there on that planet where nothing else should be, where they think nothing else could be, adds a layer of weirdness to it. It's inexplicable. It's not just a holodeck program, because they know about holodecks. They have holodeck programs that they run every day. That's become sort of standard equipment for these people. But the having this structure and apparently these humans living on this planet where they shouldn't be able to exist, that the inexplicable quality of that just adds something extra to it. I think it would have been greatly diminished if it had been an actual holodeck episode. Although, in terms of plot, as you point out, it very easily could have been. So I'm glad that the writers of that episode got a little bit more creative in finding a way to get them into that hotel for that story, that it wasn't just a holodeck program somebody was running that had gone bonkers, that it was this weird alien scenario that they had to figure out what the deal was, in addition to figuring out how to get out of the hotel. So, but yeah, you're right. It's totally a holodeck episode. Stephen G. Clenard. Steve, you're a DC Comics guy. Maybe you can help me with some questions that have been vexing me for some time. How does the superhero Shazam introduce himself in casual social situations, such as a getting to know you cocktail mixer at the Hall of Justice? He can't just introduce himself with, "Hi, my name is Shazam," without reverting to his alter ego, Billy Batson, and putting a hole in the roof with a lightning bolt. My first thought was he would just use a name tag. "Hi, my name is Shazam, he, him." But I don't think the Shazamming process permits alterations to the costume. I figure the only alternative would be to use Pig Latin. I hey, I may aim nay is yea, a zam shay. Speaking of which, do you think that would be a good premise for a Silver Age supervillain, Pig Latin man who can force people to speak Pig Latin? But what would his motivation? But what would be his motivation? Aughts? Aughts they? I love that. Well, first of all, I think he could get around the Shazam problem by just introducing himself as Superman. um, yeah, he could, he could introduce, people could say, "Hi, I'm so and so," and he could say, "Hi, I'm Superman," and that would be hilarious to me and to other people who know the history of Captain Marvel slash Shazam and their not always friendly relations with DC Comics before DC bought them out. Um, but yeah, maybe like, and this has never been established in the comics, so I'm just making this up on the spot. But maybe the magic word has some kind of a safety built into it that can read intention, kind of like the universal translators in Star Trek, where the universal translators know when to leave a word untranslated. So, like when a Klingon is calling a non-Klingon speaker a patak, or is wishing them luck by saying kapla, the universal translator knows not to translate that. They know that that is meant to be spoken in the native language, right? So maybe Shazam has some kind of built-in fail-safe, so that when he is just saying it casually to introduce himself, the magic knows not to bring down the lightning and undergo the transformation. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Otherwise, he could just say, "Hi, I'm who I am." He could just shake people's hands and go, "Well, and come on, you know who I am. Don't make me say it." Um, and yes, I think Pig Latin Man would have been a fantastic Silver Age supervillain. And now that you have said it, I am shocked and disappointed that there wasn't a Pig Latin Man that was actually published somewhere in the pages of DC Comics at some point in the 1950s or 60s. That's such a perfectly goofy Silver Age concept that really Grant Morrison needs to come up with that. Grant Morrison needs to introduce Pig Latin Man into some DC comic series, because it's too good for somebody not to do. Toilet Blaze. Has the world evolved beyond oligarchical empires? In 1850, the British Empire was spanned across the world, but now it's been replaced with the British Commonwealth, which is something that its former colonies joined after being granted independence from the empire. In some cases, they were kicked to the curb, but we still love Mother Britain here in Canada. And that's the interesting part. White supremacist, patriarchal don't remind me about rich, elitist, and yet all of those wise COCs decided, nah, we like being with old Mother Britain. Why? Does this go to some "what have the Romans ever done for us" bit? Was somehow this done with the help of Britain in setting up stable democratic governments? Was having Britain head the Commonwealth in sanctions against apartheid a reason for Nelson Mandela to keep South Africa within the Commonwealth? And why can't you Americans pronounce English? Damn you and your awful TV shows. Queen's English pronunciation. I Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think even though the Commonwealth includes many nations that were once part of the empire, the relations are very different. I think it's not necessarily an argument in favor of the British Empire to say that, well, after the empire at least after the empire as it used to exist kind of went away, and a lot of the countries that were part of it decided to maintain relations with Great Britain through the Commonwealth. That doesn't necessarily justify the existence or any of the you know less morally defensible activities of the empire, because the Commonwealth is different than the empire. It's still an alliance. It's still the countries being, maintaining strong relations to each other, and even being, putting Great Britain in a superior position, sort of maintaining a kind of deference to Great Britain. But it's not quite the same as being a colony, and as Great Britain being the colonial empire. So I think it's a little different. But sure, I'm sure there are benefits to aligning oneself not only with Great Britain but also with the other countries in the Commonwealth. I'm sure there. Look, I am not opposed, as my anarchist friends know, much to their chagrin. I'm sure I am not opposed to nation states. I am not opposed to nation states entering into alliances with each other. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It can be a bad thing, and historically, it very often has been a bad thing, especially with things like the British Empire and the excesses of colonialism throughout the world, and on this continent, in Africa, in South America. There you can throw a dart at a map and find a place where colonialism has had devastating effects on people, and where people and resources have been exploited to the detriment of the people who were already living there, and to the benefit of, at least to the benefit of the wealthy classes in the imperial homeland, Great Britain in this case. So, it's not a defense of colonialism or empire necessarily, but I don't think there's anything wrong with A, nation states existing, and B, nation states deciding for their mutual benefit to align with each other. And if they decide that it's for the best, to have a kind of hierarchical lineage, a hierarchical structure where Great Britain is still at the top, but the other ones are a step below it. But I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with any of that. I think the problem is that it can go wrong quite easily, and historically it has been used to do some really, really horrible things. But I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with something like the Commonwealth, And I also don't think that the existence of the Commonwealth means that it doesn't erase the excesses and the crimes of the British Empire. So, sort of, I can see, I have, I agree with you, but I also don't necessarily agree with how you are using, or how I think you're attempting to use the Commonwealth to sort of say, well, maybe if the British Empire was so bad, then what about this? I don't think that really works, but I have no problem at all with the existence of a group like the Commonwealth. Senator Bascott, thoughts on the video, and it's a link to a YouTube video that I did not watch because I clicked the link and the video was like 27 minutes long, and I am sorry. I appreciate you being a supporter. I appreciate you asking a question, but I am not going to watch a half an hour video just so I can give you my thoughts on it for a Q&A video. I'm just not going to do that. So I apologize if that's upsetting or offensive to you. I don't mean it in a disrespectful way, but I'm just not going to watch a video that's like 30 minutes long to respond to it in a Q&A video when I have 20 other questions to answer. So for future reference, I think the video was something to do with Julian Bashir and Garrick in Deep Space Nine. So I mean, if you next time, if you want to summarize what the argument of the video was and ask me for my thoughts on that, I would be happy to offer my thoughts on that. But I mean, I don't really have time or honestly the inclination to just watch I think it was like a 27-minute video for the question. So just something to keep in mind for future reference. Orion McMurray, after watching your Worst Multiple Earth video, I got to thinking about clothing, specifically clothing that is worn by the crew to blend in with the local natives. Dr. McCoy can't get proper boots that fit, but Kirk and Spock can borrow clothes and they fit perfectly fine. I chuckle when I see this happen. Not really a question, just something I would point out. Yeah, I mean, it's a gag. It's not really consistent, but it's a gag. And actually, if you read the original screenplay for City on the Edge of Forever, Harlan Ellison even says in the action of that scene, because that's that scene where Kirk and Spock steal the clothes to conceal themselves and blend in with the locals when they're back in 1930s New York. That is in Ellison's original script, and he makes sure to note in the action, please don't have the clothes fit them perfectly. Right. And they pretty much do. I think when they're tucking in the shirts, it looks like the shirts are maybe a little long for them, but the fit for the clothes that they steal off the clothesline is pretty good. So it is, yeah, it's funny that Kirk and Spock can just grab random clothes off of a clothesline, and it basically looks like it's their size. But Dr. McCoy is given like manufactured clothes to that are you would think would suit him just fine, would be his exact size, and he can't get the boots on. Although maybe that is also a statement on how uncomfortable Nazi shoes were. Like that's the Nazi state was as bad as you think it was, and also their shoes didn't fit. So maybe there's a little bit of that too. But yeah, it's a gag, and it makes me chuckle too, especially when Spock gets impatient with him, and he's like, just point your toe and push. Like, stop complaining and put the goddamn boot on. Adam Goss, have you seen or followed the comic book review show Atop the Fourth Wall hosted by Linkara? Considering your interest in Star Trek and Batman, it'd be great to see the two of you do a review together. Well, thank you for saying that and for thinking of me, but no, I've never watched or heard of that show. So I'm sorry that I don't have anything more useful to say about it, but no, I've never even heard of it. So sorry. Trick. Hey, Steve, I hope you and yours are well. I know you are a huge comic fan, especially Batman and Superman. There are few superheroes that don't have powers of one kind or another. Would you prefer to be a powered hero or someone such as Batman who uses his intellect as his power? Superman is intelligent as would need to be due to his day job, but on most occasions it's smartly using his powers that get him through a given situation. Personally, I'd like both. Also, if you don't mind, do you have a favorite Marvel character? Well, if both is on the table, then I'll say both. But if I have to choose one or the other, I think I would rather have powers. Like I would rather be able to fly. Like that's what I would want. I would rather be able to fly. But if I could have both, of course I'd rather have both. And yeah, I do have a favorite Marvel character. My favorite Marvel character is Spider-Man. I remember when I was in my early 20s, I got some of those Marvel omnibus editions that were like the big black and white comics where they were reprints of the comics from the 60s. And I read the entire the entire original Stan Lee, Steve Ditko run. And then after Ditko left and John Romita came in and took over. And I didn't read the entire Stan Lee, John Romita run because that one lasted a long time, but I read a lot of it. And I mean, and they're still some of the best superhero comics I've ever read. It's just fantastic. That Stan Lee, Ditko / Romita Spider-Man run from the 60s. It's just some of my favorite stuff. So I would say Spider-Man, and also Spider-Man's, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, I think are all terrific. I even like Spider-Man 3, although Spider-Man 2 is my favorite. Spider-Man 2 is one of my favorite, superhero movies, period. And I think the MCU Spidey movies have been good so far. Homecoming and Far From Home, and I'm really looking forward to No Way Home. And of course, Into the Spider-Verse was a masterpiece. So I mean, yeah, my favorite Marvel character is Spidey. My favorite Marvel character is definitely Spidey. Detail Bear, do you remember the cartoon, The Herculoids? I have fond memories, especially of Gloop and Gleep, the protoplasmoids. If you remember the show, did you have a favorite character? It sounds familiar. I feel like I've heard of it, but I don't have any recollection of ever watching it, and I don't remember any of the characters from it. So I'm afraid I can't. Once again, I'm going to have to offer a non-answer because I'm not familiar with the subject of the question. But it sounds familiar. Like I'm not hearing the title for the first time. I know that, but I don't think I ever watched it, or if I did, it didn't leave much of an impression. Andrew Priest. You got a lot of haters out there, Steve. I mean, geez. I read a comment on another TrekTubers video. I think it was either Jesse Gender or Rowan J. Coleman, where someone asked if they'd consider doing a collaboration with you, and loads of the replies were really negative. My question is, what's the deal with that? You seem like a damn nice moral guy, but these guys were acting like you walked into their houses every morning and pissed in their cereal bowls. Or is this you a cunning facade? Is the real Steve much worse? Is there no Steve? Is Michael Worley the real you? No, this is more or less the real me. What you see in in most of my videos, in the videos where I'm not obviously playing either another character or a caricatured version of myself, like the me that's in the Ask a Professional YouTuber videos is obviously a put on. I'm not really like that. And hopefully that comes across. Um, but most of the time, if I'm in a video, I'm myself, and the myself that you see in the video is pretty much how I am in real life. And I think people who know me in real life would back that up. Um, I think it's because it's one of two reasons. And if it was another Star Trek YouTuber, I'm not really sure. But going back before I was doing like Star Trek videos and pop culture videos as the big draw on my channel, when I was doing videos that were more focused on like atheism and secularism and stuff like that, I made a lot of enemies because I said that I supported feminism and I supported social justice, and I gave absolutely no time at all to people who were generating much more revenue and gathering much larger audiences than I was by being anti-feminists and anti-SJW and being trolls and leading harassment campaigns against people and doing response videos to not just me, but a lot of other people as well, and just shitting on them and shitting on their content and cannibalizing their content for their response videos and all kinds of stuff like that. And I didn't give any of those people the time of day. And some of them and some of their fans on their behalf tried to get me to come on their shows or do collaborations with them or stream with them or have quote unquote debates with them. And my answer was always, you tell him to go fuck himself. Like, I have nothing to say to them. I have nothing. I need nothing, nor want to have anything to do with any of them. I think they're all pieces of shit and they can all go to hell. Some of them had made attack videos against me, attack videos against my wife at the time. And they're just nasty, awful people. So I made a lot of enemies in that camp that may still be lingering for people who were fans of theirs and are still sore at me for that, because I told their favorite, shithead anti-feminist YouTuber to go fuck themselves. But it may also be because within Trek YouTube, I don't really have much good to say about people who are constantly trying to stir up fan outrage and take a shit on the newer Star Trek shows, or spread conspiracy theories, or just flat out made up bullshit lies about the new Star Trek shows, like they're a complete failure and Paramount and CBS are panicking and they're all about to be canceled and Alex Kurtzman is about to be fired and nobody really, the studio is in an uproar because they know that nobody really likes the new shows, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And again, not nearly as harmful to society at large as the anti-feminists or the anti-SJWs were doing back, years ago, but the same sort of thing, like profiting on propagating toxicity and negativity and anger and fan grievance over something not being what they expected it to be or not being what they think they're entitled to. And I have no good for those people. I think they're all assholes too. And people who get pissy about if a Star Trek show looks differently than they think a Star Trek show should look, if a Star Trek show if there's something about it that they claim the ability to define what their favorite thing ought to be, and if something goes outside the lines, then they will attack it and they will attack people who like it. And I just think that's bullshit. And I've said so, and I've done what I can to alienate such people from my channel. Like, I'm not trying to pander to them or make friends with them. And maybe those are some of the people who are replying to that video. They don't like me because I don't like them. Fuck them. I don't need them and I don't want them. So maybe that's it. I don't know. Agent Meister, penny for your thoughts, Steve. See what I did there? TNG, Q and Tapestry. I can be a Trek nerd too. Can we be friends, Steve? Can we? Anywho, I've been banging my head against a wall trying to come up with a question that is profound and at the same time whimsical, but all I have to show for it is a concussion. So I'll go uber geek and ask you this. What is your favorite captain's chair in all of Star Trek? It can have featured in every episode of a particular series, or it could have just been seen for a scene or two. It can be Starfleet or Alien, and I will also accept the chair in Cisco's office because I'm a kind, warm-hearted human being. My own favorite is Janeway's chair on Voyager. It seems both comfortable and functional. Also, I got my first vaccination recently, so I'm celebrating later with a barrel of Klingon blood wine, 2309 Shives. There is no finer vintage. Kapla, Agent Meister in Ireland. My favorite captain's chair. I like the captain's chair from the Enterprise in Star Trek 6. I love that whole bridge set in Star Trek 6. I just think that is one of my favorite bridge sets. So I like that captain's chair. I really like the Enterprise captain's chair in that we see in Discovery as well. I think that's a really great sort of redesign and updating of the classic TOS captain's chair that we see in the original series. So I really like that one too. It's hard to choose. But probably one of those two. I feel like the captain's chair in Voyager is too nondescript. Like it doesn't really, you know what I mean? It's like it's kind of like Picard's chair, but a different color and slightly different upholstery. But it's like up against sort of a wall, and Chakotay's chair is right next to it. And it's like the captain's chair is not in the middle. It's two chairs that are side by side. So like the captain isn't in a special position. And I don't know. There's a little niggling problems that I have, like just nitpicky stuff about the Voyager chair. If I'm going to get like super nerdy about it, but yeah, if I had to pick, it would be an Enterprise captain's chair, and it would either be the one from Star Trek 6 or the one that we see in the Star Trek Discovery version of the classic Enterprise bridge. Ahoy, Erno! Good video on billionaires in space. How about we don't send military personnel up there either? Most astronauts were trained to murder people of other nationalities, and, in my humble opinion, they're not the best people for a humanitarian or scientific expedition. ISS is one of the only spaces in the universe where we actually expect Russian and American soldiers to get along. Yeah, or, I mean, former soldiers. I don't have a problem with astronauts being veterans of the military. As most of them have been historically. That doesn't bother me. But I agree with you that I would not like to see active duty military sent up in space on military missions. I am not in favor of the militarization of space at all. I think it's a bad idea. If we knew there were hostile aliens within striking distance of the planet and that they wanted our ass and we needed to defend the planet, if it was like some sci-fi shit going on, then yeah, absolutely. Let's have a space force. I would be 100% in favor of that. But there ain't no aliens trying to kill us. We don't need a space. The only reason for us to have a space force is so we can have forces in space that we can use to kill other people on this planet. And I'm not okay with that. I'm not in favor of that. I like the idea of space being neutral territory. I like the idea of what you described with the International Space Station. Yes, there are people of multiple nationalities up there, and they all get along because they're all on the same mission, and it's a mission of science, and it's a mission of peace, and that's how I would like it to stay. So, yeah, I completely am on board with you there. I do not want to see military personnel up there. I do not want to see space itself be more. I mean, it's a little militarized already because there are military satellites up there, but I definitely don't want us to be sending military people up there or conducting like military operations where we are, bombing other people's countries or setting up, really heavy duty like defense systems that can cause serious damage. I'm just not. I would really, really like to not see. It's probably inevitable. Like if we don't do it, someone else will do it, and then we'll feel like we have to do it. And so, I mean, I'm not optimistic about that. But if it was up to me, yeah, I would keep the billionaires out of space, and I would keep the military, the military personnel at least out of space as well, for sure. Here's a question from Dana, who is feeling hopeless and discouraged. Well, hopefully you were feeling hopeless and discouraged when you wrote the question, but you're not feeling that way now. I've been noticing a similarity between teaching as a profession and the speculative fiction fandoms I've been involved with. They're both dominated by white people. The activity on your channel seems to be a bit more diverse than within sci-fi in general, but it still skews mostly white and male. In both cases, I feel somewhat helpless to make any meaningful change. I'm just one person at the bottom of the hierarchy, an employee and a consumer. What are some things I could do to push for change given my limited platform? And speaking of that, what are some things that you can do to push for change, Mr. YouTube Big Shot? Um, well, feature non-white people on my channel more than I do, which I tried to do that during when I was doing the Steve's conversation streams before I burnt out doing that. I would try to feature women more often than men, and people of color more often than white people, and I think I did a passable job at that. So that's something. And just maybe little things like when I do videos where I use like a stock image of people to illustrate something, if at all possible, if it's not like a specific person that I need to have a picture of, if I just need sort of stock images of generic people, I try to find stock images of people of color to use for that, and or women, or basically people not like me and not like most people who watch my channel. And it's not, it doesn't make that big of a difference, and it's not that big of a deal, and I don't say that because I expect like a pat on the back for it or anything, but it's just a little thing to reinforce that people who look like me are not and ought not be thought of as the default, and just to break that a little tiny bit if I can is something that I try to do. I don't know if it makes any difference. I don't know if it does any good at all, but it's something that I try to do, if at all possible, is to use non-white people, and women, in stock images of people in my videos if it calls for that. I mean, I don't know. I relate to the helpless feeling. The last time I checked my analytics for my channel, it was something like 89% male, 11% female, and that is fairly typical, for my channel. Like, that's usually what the breakdown is. Sometimes it's maybe 88 or 87% male to 12 or 13% women. Sometimes it's a little higher or lower. It fluctuates by a couple percent in either direction, but it's generally in that range, and it has been for a long time, which is better than other channels. Like, there are some channels that skew even more majority male than mine does. So I try to tell myself that and say, well, you're doing a little better in that area than other people are. But I mean, not as good as I would like. Of course, I would love it if it were not nearly so lopsided, if it were equal or even closer to equal. But there's only so much you can do. So I mean, I relate to the helpless feeling, and like I say, there are little things you can do to try and at least let viewers know that you're aware of it, and that you're trying to to not just accept the white male dominant default. But I mean, I'm not sure what you can do to really make a serious change on it. Here's a short and sweet one from Christopher. What is your favorite color? My favorite color is blue. I don't really have very strong feelings about it at all. Like, I don't, I say blue, but I'm not like, I don't feel very strongly about it, but I would say blue. When I was a kid, my favorite color was green, because that was the color of my dad's, and also my grandfather both had pickup trucks that were green, and they were the same shade of green. It was kind of cute. They both had, like, they weren't exactly the same model. They were different years, but they were both Chevy pickup trucks, and they were both pretty much the same shade of green. So green was my favorite color back then, but now I think I'd probably say it was blue. So Glenn Hellwig. Hey, Steve, hope you're doing well. I belong to a DS9 Facebook group, and we go back and forth a lot about Esri Dax. Some people think she was bad, and others thought she was good. I've always thought, although Jadzia was missed, I thought Nicole did a good job as Esri, given the fact that she only got one season and basically had to build her character on the fly. What do you think of her? I like Esri. I like Esri a lot, and I think it's really impressive what both Nicole DeBoer as the actor and also the writers of the show were able to do with Esri, given the fact that they did only have one season with her. I think by the end of the season, they had actually developed her and made her into a really interesting character with a lot of depth, given the fact that they only had one season to do it. So, and I think in one of the I can't remember if he says it in the What We Left Behind documentary, or if it was another interview I've seen with Ira Stephen Bear where he kind of jokes that at certain points in season 7 it feels like it's the Esri show, because they do give her a lot of time. They spend a lot of time on Esri in season 7, and I like I say, I don't mind that, because I get what they're doing. They don't want the new character. They don't want it to be sort of last in, first out. They don't want to give the new character in the last season of the show the short end of the stick, and they want to make sure that she gets the attention and the development that the other characters have gotten. So, I mean, there are times when it does kind of feel like the Esri show, but I don't think it's to the overall detriment of the show, and I think they do a good job. So I'm very pro Esri, very much. I mean, it's difficult to compare her to Jadzia because Jadzia had 6 seasons and Esri only has 1. But I think she is a terrific character and played by a terrific actor. So I'm very pro Esri. Jim Baker. So I rewatched Star Trek Beyond, and you are right, it is a great movie. Your perspective of a unified crew that was committed to each other helped me appreciate the movie in a new light. So thank you for that. And now for something completely different. My question this week is a simple matter of opinion. I have greatly enjoyed mocking Trump supporters for their zeal in supporting him. They wear his hats, they wear his shirts, and they fly his flags in their yards and on their pickup trucks. It's one of the most bizarre phenomenons I've ever witnessed, and I derive a great deal of pleasure poking fun at it. That being said, I recently found out that AOC has a merchandise site that offers hats and t-shirts in support of various progressive positions. Now I find myself in a state of cognitive dissonance. If I buy her gear, which I really want to do, I will find myself guilty of the very thing I mock. My question is, which is more important, mocking the right or supporting the left? Supporting the left is more important. And you can still mock the right while supporting the left and not, at least in my eyes, not be a hypocrite for it, because I don't think, and I'm not trying to read your mind here, but I think we're probably more or less on the same page with this. When I am mocking Trump supporters and right-wingers in general for wearing Trump's merchandise, right? I'm not mocking the idea of merch or the idea of buying t-shirts or hats to support things that you support. I'm mocking the fact that some of these people go so far overboard. They don't just wear a t-shirt or wear a hat. They wear it and display it to an obnoxious degree. And it's for Donald Trump. You know, it's not like you're an Orioles fan, so you wear an Orioles cap. It's not like, you have a favorite band, so you wear a T-shirt of your favorite band. It's they orient their entire style and their entire identity around it, and the thing that they've done that around is Donald Trump. So he's who is an ignoramus and one of the most unimpressive human beings who has ever walked the planet, and that's in addition to the bigotry and the hatred and the stoking insurrection and the corruption and the dishonesty and the atrocities of his administration and the abusive things that he himself has done in his life, and just the general shittiness of it all, right? That's what they're buying shirts and hats for. So I think you can buy all of the merch you want to support progressive causes and progressive politicians and still be able to make fun of Trump supporters still wearing fucking MAGA hats after all these years and all the other horseshit that they do, because it's not the merch itself or the buying of the merch itself that is the problem. It's what it represents, and it's how fucking over the top and obnoxious they are about it. So, but that's just my 2 cents. Wolfie Basach. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I may not be. Basach, Basaki, Basak. I don't know. Wolfie Basach, I'll say. Hi, Steve. Greetings from Her Majesty's Disunited Kingdom. Hope you're well. I recently heard an argument for saying Star Trek and Ronald D. Moore's For All Mankind could fit into each other's universes. I've also heard a proposal, although not the details, suggesting the Battlestar Galactica reboot would also match up, as well as a hint within the actual dialogue itself that the recent 3-part Dracula adaptation and Doctor Who had a connection. My question is, what other fictional universes do you think Trek could theoretically exist with, despite the Alien versus Predator balls up making it pretty unlikely in a practical sense? Honestly, I am of the opinion that any fictional universe and any other fictional universe could be smashed together for a crossover with just a little bit of creativity. And part of it is that I grew up reading comic book crossovers where, I mean, there were eventually big like company wide crossovers between like Marvel and DC where there was a whole story to explain how the two universes were interacting. But back starting in like the 60s or the 70s, they would do crossovers where like it was a Superman and Spider-Man crossover, and it was just for one book. It was just like a special comic that was just the crossover, and they just ran into each other. Like Spider-Man and Superman just were working the same case, and they bumped into each other. And for the sake of that story, we just said, okay, for the purposes of this story, we'll just say that they exist in the same universe, even though. In regular monthly Marvel comics and DC comics, Spider-Man is not really in the DC universe and Superman is not really in the Marvel universe, but somebody had a good idea or somebody they thought it would be a good way to sell comics and make both sides some money. And the writer came up with a story and they said, fuck it, we're just going to throw them together and not waste any time explaining how it's possible that Spider-Man and Superman could be in the same universe. Who gives a shit? Let's just tell a fun story with both these characters. And so that is my frame of reference and that is my mindset for the most part. So, I mean, if you want to do Star Trek and DC Comics, like just do it. Just, like I did, and this is a bad example because it's for a silly, action figure comic that I do, but I did a story for my Star Trek photo comics that I make with those Star Trek dolls back there where Superman shows up. And the way I explained it was Superman time traveled to the future from the past because Superman exists in the 20th or the 21st centuries, and Star Trek is set in the 24th century. So how did Superman get there? Well, he just time traveled. So I'm assuming that they exist in the same universe. And does that create contradictions? I guess if you're like a super duper Star Trek nerd, you know, or a super duper Superman nerd, and you compare the histories of the two fictional planets, you can think, oh, wait a minute, Superman couldn't have been there because of XYZ, or, this couldn't have led to, like, the 24th century in DC Comics universe is not the same as the 24th century. It's like, blah, 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 who gives a shit? Like, that's basically my attitude. My attitude is blah, 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 who gives a shit? So with that attitude, I think that any fictional universes could coexist for the purposes of a story, if that's what you want. So, mash up Star Trek and Star Wars. Fuck it. The Enterprise falls through a wormhole and winds up in the Star Wars galaxy. Like, who gives a shit? What happens after that point? I'm less worried about what brings the two universes together than I am with what happens after that. What is the story? What is the point? Right? Why are we here? I'm way more interested in that. And, if getting to that point requires you to do a little, to play fast and loose with the established continuity of the various universes, or to just kind of hand wave some stuff to get to the fun part, I'm completely okay with that. So yeah, that's basically my attitude. Just cross over whatever you want with anything you want. If you're a good enough writer, if you're a creative enough writer, you can make it work. Relic 5000, greetings. This is a Starfleet ordered war game simulation. It takes place in open space using lasers while computers simulate damage, like in the TNG episode Peak Performance. Captain Sisko versus Captain Janeway. The rules: 1. Both captains are assigned identical Danube-class runabouts that lack replicators, transporters, and warp drive. 2. Both captains can pick an officer out of the other's crew to assist them. Sisko can pick a Voyager officer, and Janeway can pick a DS9 officer. 7 of 9 is refusing to participate and can't be chosen. 3. Both captains have 1 day to modify the runabouts any way they can, using only what's available on board. Who does each captain pick as their first officer? How do they modify their runabouts? Who wins and why? I want to point out that I do not like this question. This is very close to the question I always make fun of people for asking, like, if you could pick your dream starship crew and using characters from all the different shows, who would you pick and who would be what position and why? The problem I have with this question is there are too many rules and it's too specific. And there's too much, there are too many pieces for me to get in place that I personally, and no disrespect to you because you've obviously put some thought into this question, but me personally, I don't give a shit about any of this. Like, what modifications do they make to the runabouts? I don't know. I don't care. No disrespect. I just don't give a shit. How do they modify the runabouts? I don't know. One of them, they do different things with the phasers. Who cares? Who do they pick for first office? I don't know. Who does Cisco pick from Voyager's crew? Cisco picks. See, I don't. What? Why would any of this? I don't get what's interesting about these questions. Again, if this is something that you enjoy thinking about and talking about, more power to you. But it's just not my kind of question. If you ask me who would win in a war games between Captain Cisco and Captain Janeway, and just left it at that, that's a question I could do something with. Because I would, first of all, Captain Cisco would win because Captain Cisco poisoned the planet to get a bad guy once. So Captain Cisco, and I know Janeway's done some pretty, morally questionable things too. But Captain Cisco has like poisoned entire planets to get one guy. So I wouldn't want to bet against Cisco. Uh, so I would put my money on Captain Cisco. And of course, and if I was writing it, of course, Captain Cisco would win because that's my guy. But I mean, who would they pick to be their first officers from the other person's crew? Like it's way too specific, man. It's way too specific. And it is leaning in directions that like are that just do not interest me. So again, no disrespect. I'm not trying to take a shit on you or insult you. And I hope I haven't hurt your feelings, but it's just, it's not the kind of question that I find remotely interesting. Like who would win between Cisco and Janeway? Yeah, sure. That's open enough that I can do something with that. But all the little qualifications I have to meet, that's just I'm not here for that. I'm not up for that at all. But thank you for being a supporter and thank you for the question. General Contact Unit Problem Child. I'll probably never do anything with it, but for a few years now, I've had this idea for an alternate history where in 1964, a portal opens 1,100 kilometers above the North Pole. The portal leads to an alternate Earth where it's still the Iron Age. The video you made the other day. The US government stopped really caring about space exploration because neoliberalism took over politics in the 70s, and there's nothing in near-Earth space to profit from. In my alternate timeline, there's a whole world of resources, including people, to exploit just 2,200 kilometers away. So the US government keeps funding space travel. How'd you feel if you lived in a world where space travel was well funded, but only because it was helping us cost effectively transport extracted resources from another world? Basically, would you still be in favor of space exploration if it was being done for the same messed up reason sea exploration was done hundreds of years ago? That is a great question. And no, I wouldn't. I mean, I would still be in favor of space exploration in theory. I would want us to do legitimate space exploration. I'd want us to do, moon landings and go to Mars and other planets and have satellites and have space probes and space telescopes and all of that stuff. But the whole flying to the other world through the portal to exploit their resources, no. And if that was the only reason we were doing it, like if it was a choice between you can have space exploration, but it has to be this, or you can't have space exploration, I mean, I would have to say, well, then I guess we just can't have space exploration because that's horrible, And so, I mean, if that is the choice, then I guess I have to say no space exploration. But that would suck. But yeah, I mean, there are times when lines have to be drawn, and I feel like that's a line I would have to draw. Like my love of space exploration is because of the exploration and the science and the pushing new frontiers and the spreading out into the universe and the traveling among the planets and the stars. Like it's not, well, we're exploiting another world and we're enslaving people and robbing them of their resources, et cetera, et cetera. But at least we're going to space to do it. Like at least there's that. Like that's not what it's about, So yeah, I would have to say I was against it. Russell, hey Steve. So I got a bit of a doozy question here regarding Worf. At the end of DS9, Worf is appointed Federation ambassador to the Klingon Empire, and yet when we see him again in Nemesis, he's back at Tactical. More even being at Tactical would seem like a demotion since he was first officer on the Defiant. So did the writers get lazy with his character, or was this a sly way to give TNG fans only what they wanted? LOL. I was going to talk about Cisco being a war criminal and possibly an operative of Section 31, but I will save that for another time. That's my question. I trust you are well, and I'll see you Friday. Oh, not question, just a comment. My rewatch of NYPD Blue got to one of my favorite scenes on the entire series, the rib diner with Fancy and Sipowicz, and I still love it. What if they had guns and badges? I remember that scene. That's a hell of a scene, and I'm glad that you're continuing your rewatch of NYPD Blue, which, as you know, is one of my favorite shows too. With Worf, I think it was both. I think the writers wanted to give fans what they wanted, which was to have Worf in a movie with the rest of the TNG cast, and they just got lazy about explaining what Worf was doing there. Worf, yeah, at the end of Deep Space Nine, Worf had left Starfleet and was becoming the Klingon ambassador, and then in the movie, he's just back. Like they couldn't be bothered to think of a reason why Worf was there. They're just, Worf's just back. Fuck it. And you know what? Honestly, if Nemesis was a better movie, that probably wouldn't bother me so much. I mean, I would just chalk it up to, well, it's been a few years, he came back, right? But because Nemesis overall is such a shitty movie, it does not fill me with the spirit of charity toward it. You know, so I notice things like that, and I sort of judge it negatively for things like that. I think, you know, the movie overall was written very badly and was lazy and was dumb, and so of course the inclusion of Worf is along those same lines. So I think it's both. They wanted Worf there, but they couldn't be bothered to come up with a decent enough reason for Worf to be there. So they said, fuck it, Worf's just there. You know, I think that was the reason. You know, and I mean, I'm not going to, I think Worf should have been there too. I agree completely with including Worf in the movies with the rest of the TNG crew. I would just, you know, if the last time we saw Worf was he was doing something completely different and now he's just back, then you would either preferably you'll do both of these things, but you should definitely either come up with a good reason for Worf to be there all of a sudden and back in Starfleet, or if you're not going to do that, at least write a goddamn good movie that is, you know, that where Worf's presence in it makes the movie better, so that I don't give a shit why Worf's there. He's just there because he's there, you know. Joe McClory, can you spend a minute or two recommending some stuff? Movies, YouTube channels, books, charities, whatever. Let me see. I over the weekend I watched some westerns that I hadn't seen before, because I watched The Hateful Eight, which I watched to do the live stream I did with Christy Winters yesterday. And after I watched The Hateful Eight, I was in like a Western sort of mood. So I actually watched a couple of Westerns that I have wanted to watch for years and years and years and just didn't get around to seeing before. And one was the 2007 version of 3:10 to Yuma with Christian Bale and Russell Crowe. And that was really good. I mean, that was excellent. And then the other one, which was even better, was the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. Now, that is a masterpiece. That is one of the best movies I've seen in a very, very long time. And if I had seen it in the year it came out, I probably would have thought it was the best movie from that year. I mean, it's just, it's beautiful. It's a great movie. Great performances, great music, great sort of mythic feel to it. Beautifully directed, beautifully told. It's great. It's just a great movie. So I would recommend that. It's been out for a month, and I guess I didn't notice it had come out, but yesterday I listened to the new Modest Mouse album, and I've only listened to it once, and I'm gonna have to listen to it multiple times, and which I'm delighted to, because Modest Mouse is one of my favorite bands. But I've only listened to it once, but after one listening, it was really good. So I'll recommend the new Modest Mouse album as well. And for charities, I would always recommend Give Directly, which is linked in the description of this video and is linked in the description, I think, of all my videos now, is Give Directly, which is a charity that collects donations and then uses the money to, get this, give directly to people in need. They identify people who are in need and they just give them money. What a concept. So that would be the charity I would recommend. And thank you for the invitation to ask me to recommend some stuff. I appreciate that, Joe. Science Pundit. Hi, Steve. I've really been enjoying the show, Superman and Lois. I agree with you that Superman is everything that Zack Snyder's Superman isn't. However, I've noticed that many fans of Man of Steel and Justice League also like this Superman and say that he reminds them of the Snyder Cavill Superman. I guess if I squint really hard, I kind of see it. Is it possible that the creators of Superman and Lois are geniuses who've managed to unite a fractured by Zack Snyder fan base? Also, I assume that you will be reviewing the first season, and I look forward to it. Yes, there will be Superman and Lois videos coming at some point after the first season is over. I know Dana and I have talked about doing videos about it, and I'll probably at least do one sort of solo season long review video about it. So there will, and if I have others more specific thoughts about it that I can do myself, or that I could do a video alongside Dana where we talk about it, there will definitely be Superman and Lois videos coming up at some point in the near-ish future on this channel for sure, because I love that show. Um, the thing is, people who like Zack Snyder's Superman and consider that to be a good version of Superman have their heads so far up their ass that I don't know if they would know a good Superman if it bumped into them and said, "Excuse me," which Zack Snyder's Superman would not do because he's a dick. He wouldn't say "excuse me," but the Superman and Lois Tyler Hoechlin Superman would definitely say "excuse me" because he's a nice guy. Um, I think actually it's not so much that the creators of Superman and Lois are geniuses. It's that I do see the if you are the type of fan who sees Superman as more of an action oriented character, and you like to see Superman get in fights, which again I don't really get, at least not as a cornerstone of the character. Um, but if that is something that you enjoy, there is stuff for you in the show because we do get to see Superman having fights with people, you know, and it doesn't bring down the show for me because he's not having fights in the middle of a city where he's punching people through buildings full of people. And it doesn't feel like it's an orgy of destruction. Most of the superpower fights in Superman and Lois thus far have been staged in locations away from populated areas. So it doesn't raise those questions of collateral damage and is Superman really that super if he has to destroy somebody's town in order to beat the bad guy? They avoid that by having Superman act like a responsible adult and take his superpowered fights away from populated areas, and they can still have their super fight, right? So if you like that, you've got that in the show. So I mean, I do see that that version of the character could have an appeal broad enough to include fans who see him more as an action figure than I do. So yeah, I mean, and maybe that was calculated on their part. I think probably part of it was, and I think certainly the aesthetic of the show, like the Superman suit that he wears, is closer to the DCEU version of the suit than I would personally like it to be. Like I would rather it be a much brighter color and not have all the scaly texture shit on it. I would rather it be a little bit closer to the suit he wore in Supergirl, which was a brighter, deeper shade of blue, and didn't look as desaturated and movie-ish, right? But yeah, so I think there are things in the show that people who enjoyed Man of Steel might like. I can see that, why that might appeal to them. Sure. I mean, I personally don't give a shit whether it does one way or the other, but I see how it could definitely. Some random geek who is always agit-propping but failed to ask a question. During the readaways, you shared your dislike of the political philosophy of the Odonians. You hate their philosophical masturbation parts in The Dispossessed. Just remember, as Americans, the society of the U.S. is responsible for firebombing Japanese cities at the end of World War II, killing 100,000 citizens, involved in 92 regime changes and coups around the world, stealing land and genociding indigenous folks, supporting 73% of the world's current military dictatorships, slavery, Hiroshima, millions of deaths because of the crippling sanctions and embargoes, Japanese internment, lynch mobs. I could go on. The Nazis learned from U.S. genocide programs, and I know you are not in favor of any of that, but if the worst the Odonians have is philosophical masturbation and a stagnant government, it is an easy choice between living on Anarish and living in the USA, especially since if I'm born again, I can't control if I am born as a white cis-passing man from a middle-class family. You can yell at me. I'm not going to yell at you, although I have in the past, but I'm not going to do that this time. I will just point out that you're saying, like, if the worst the Odonians have is philosophical masturbation and a stagnant government, it's an easy choice. Well, sure, it's an easy choice between the made-up pretend place that appears in a book written by an author with an anarchist philosophy herself who, and to her credit, did not present the anarchist society as ideal, which is one of the things, as you know, because you watched that series. I really appreciated that about the Dispossessed, that it didn't try to argue that the anarchist society was perfect or even ever could be perfect. Like I thought that was, it certainly made it more palatable to me. And it was a very artful and writerly and commendable choice on Le Guin's part to do that, and not to just write a polemic. But that's a make believe place, and you can tell it's a make believe place because they've had an anarchist form of government or anarchist society that has remained stable and in place for like hundreds of years. Like that's, in other words, it's a fantasy. So yeah, of course. I mean, I could say like it would be just like me saying, well, if the choice is between the Federation and the United States, of course I choose the Federation. Well, of course I do. The Federation is made up. It's make believe. Like, so in other words, like I don't think it's a point in favor of anarchism to say I would rather live in the make believe anarchist society in the book where apparently they're not responsible for any atrocities or anything like that. I mean, yeah, but yes, of course, the crimes of the United States, the crimes of the United States government that you list there, I don't dispute any of that or condone any of that. And I don't think there's any excuse for it, or I don't think it's excusable to deny any of it. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that an anarchist society is workable, unfortunately. And that's really where we diverge ideologically. I mean, we both agree that all of that stuff you listed that the United States has been guilty of or complicit in is awful and inexcusable. But that doesn't mean that an anarchist society is workable or realistic, especially for a country this size and this diverse in terms of culture and in terms of ideology. David Colby, I forgot to ask a question until the last second, making me worse than Hitler. Anywho, a lot of people saying anywho in their questions this time. Have you noticed that? I think maybe only 2 people, but that feels like a lot. Anywho, what do you think of the new He-Mans? I hear it is not very gay, which is sad. I also hear it's not very good, which is even sadder. It's not very gay. I didn't detect any explicit gayness when I watched it this morning. I watched all 5 episodes of it this morning. It came out today. It is not gay at all that I can tell so far, unless I've missed something. And no, I don't think it is very good. I didn't think it was as bad as I feared. When I saw the trailers, I was worried that it would just outright suck, because I was not impressed by the trailers at all. I thought the trailers made it look like a really, really shitty show. It was better than the trailers made it look. And it has some interesting ideas. It attempts to do some things that could be interesting or could lead to a really compelling show. But overall, as I said on Twitter earlier, I think it takes itself way too seriously. I think it doesn't seem to realize how silly its story is and how silly its world is. And it's depressing, and it's only intermittently fun. It has on paper, it has a really good vocal cast. In practice, unfortunately, the cast doesn't always do that great of a job. Some of that, and it's not a reflection on their talents. Maybe it's a reflection on how they were directed, or maybe they're being inexperienced in doing voice acting. Or in one case, just I think the actor just doesn't suit the character at all. Like they have Kevin Conroy doing the voice of Merman, and he's basically doing the Batman voice. Like he's just doing the typical Kevin Conroy voice as Merman. And that just doesn't suit that character at all. Like, can you imagine, if you haven't watched it yet, just if you know what Merman looks like and how Merman's generally depicted in the original He-Man cartoon, Just imagine that guy, but imagine when he opens his mouth, Batman's voice comes out. It just doesn't fit. It just doesn't suit. And I don't know if it's a reflection on Kevin Conroy not having very much vocal range, or if it's that he was directed to do the Batman voice because the people who made the show just wanted him to do the Batman voice. I'm not sure what it is, but it just doesn't suit the character at all. And there are other things like that throughout the show that just like really on paper, like super talented people, really impressive names, but their work does not impress in this. Um, Skeletor, Mark Hamill as Skeletor is really good, but the character as written is just flat and dull. Mark Hamill does manage to steal a couple of laughs from Skeletor. There's a line that he has during a lull in a battle with He-Man where he and Evelyn are on a ship out in the middle of, I think it's the Crystal Sea on Eternia, and there's like just sort of a lull in the battle, and Skeletor looks around at the boat and he says, "Wouldn't this be nice if we painted it granite?" And it's funny, you know what I mean? And it's a credit to Mark Hamill for delivering that line in such a perfect tone that it gets a really good laugh. But I didn't think it was terrible. It wasn't a chore to finish. Like I watched all 5 episodes back to back to back, and I didn't find myself hating it, but I was kind of annoyed with it, and I didn't think it was all that great. But it wasn't as bad as I was afraid it would be. So there's that. But inevitably, I think it's going to be compared to the new She-Ra show, and it's not even close to that level. I mean, the new She-Ra series was terrific, was really fantastic, and this new He-Man is not even worth comparing. I mean, it's not even remotely on the same level. One of the things that the new She-Ra show did really well that this show desperately needs and just doesn't get is the new She-Ra show balanced having real emotional weight where you cared about the characters and what happened to them, and also being a huge amount of fun. The She-Ra series pulled that off really, really well. It's such a fun show. It's such a bright, colorful, exciting, well-paced, put together show. It's fun. It's a fun show, but it also has a lot of emotional depth to it. And you can really get into it and care about the characters and be invested in what's happening. And the new He-Man show just has none of that. It's not fun, and there's not a very much emotional weight to what's going on. It feels like it was made by people who somehow got the impression that the classic Filmation He-Man cartoon was like some really deep shit. And I just don't understand that mindset. I don't understand. It's like the pitch was, let's do the 1980s He-Man cartoon, but let's do it like if it took itself really seriously. And I can't fathom why anybody would want to do that, or why anybody would think that would be good. I just don't get that. But anyway, yeah, I was underwhelmed. I was extremely underwhelmed by it. Isaiah Taylor, when I write a book about being autistic and a minority, I want to tell my story and not have it dictated by the white mom narrative, i.e. those overly cute and sensationalized stories of mothers and to some extent fathers who raise mostly white autistic kids. My story is a little gritty and depressing, but I think my story should be heard. So what do you think? Should we have more autistic voices that don't fit the typical narrative? Anyway, how's it going? A friend of mine committed suicide last weekend, so for me, that was a bummer. He was a veteran suffering from PTSD, really fucked up. I've been consoling his fiance about grief and loss. I'm really, really sorry to hear that. I mean, I've been fine. I've been well. Really sorry to hear about your friend. And yes, of course, I think there should be more autistic voices and more diverse autistic voices. Absolutely. There should be more diverse voices in general, but particularly with something that is so misunderstood as autistic people, as neuroatypical people, across the board. I think we would all benefit from having more diverse voices telling their own stories, and sharing their own individual experiences. I think that's very important and would be a huge improvement. And I think if you wanted to write a book about that someday, I think that would be terrific. I think that would be it could be a very valuable entry in that, and valuable part of that good work. So yeah, I totally agree with you there. We should have more autistic voices that don't fit the prevailing narrative. And finally, we're ending on a wrestling question. Thank you, Kemp. Thank you. From Kemp Chalmers. Hey, Steve. Swanton bomb or moonsault? Ooh, boy. It depends on who is doing the move. I mean, the Great Muda's moonsault is a thing of beauty. But I would have to say, if we're talking original Jeff Hardy Swanton bomb, I'm going to go with Swanton bomb. The Swanton bomb, when Jeff first started pulling that thing out and doing that, that was my favorite wrestling move for a couple years because Jeff Hardy did that move better than I think anybody has done it since, where he had the arm position where when he would jump off the top rope and he would lay out and he would have his arms behind him like some kind of a bird, and then he would do the tuck and he would it was almost like he was hanging in midair, and then he would do the tuck really quick, like at the last minute, where it looked like he was falling toward the guy and it looked like he was going to nail him. He was going to just like land head first on the guy he was jumping on, but he would do the tuck at the last minute and land on him with the upper part of his shoulders and his back, and it was just beautiful. So I would say the Swanton. I would say the Swanton. But again, if it's Muda in his heyday, if it's like 1988, 1989, great Muda doing the moonsault, boy, that's a beautiful move. Oh God, that's a beautiful move. But I think I would go with Swanton Bomb, and that's a great question. And as I said, I appreciate getting the wrestling question for the last patron/member question. So thank you very much. All right, now let's go. I see I'm getting super chats already. Thank you, John. Let's go to the live chat and see what everybody is up to. And boy, John's got them rolling in. First super chat. First of all, there's a super chat that I got back at the beginning from Paul Wilson that just says, "Thanks for all your content. You're awesome." Thank you very much, Paul, for saying that. I really appreciate that. And then the first super chat from John Burns says, and it's a two-parter. So thank you, John, for doing a super chat for both of them. I appreciate that. Did you like Harry Kim? You think they were nice to him? Esther Smokey Smith won a Victoria Cross with the Canadian Army fighting Nazis in Italy. Earlier, he was promoted and demoted 9 times. Might this be why we never saw Harry promoted? The episodes don't include any Harry Kim motions. No, I do. I like Harry. I think he's as good of a character as they have on Voyager. I mean, he's easy to like, and I think a lot of that is because Garrett Wang is such a likable actor. Not necessarily because the character is written all that well, because unfortunately, I don't think it is. But I think I like Harry as much as I like anybody on Voyager for the most part, except maybe for Seven or the Doctor, who are kind of like the standouts among that crew. But no, I mean, I think the reason Harry was never promoted was lazy writing. I think that's the main thing. I don't think there was any justification for it either in the show or externally to the show, other than they just wanted to keep him the way he was because they wanted that show to be frozen in amber for the entire run. So Harry sort of, got most obviously got the short end of the stick from that because, he was an ensign and he was an ensign for 7 years. And another one from John says, my question centered around humans evolving away from the need for empires, and is the Commonwealth the result? I guess it's maybe a result. Sure. Yeah. I mean, like I say, I would rather have commonwealths than have empires. I think commonwealths are better than empires. So, I mean, hopefully it's a sign of us evolving away from empire, but yet still wanting to maintain connection and alliances. Yeah, definitely. And yet another one from John who says, so about the Cleveland Guardians, Edmonton Elks. So the Cleveland Indians are changing their name finally. And they're going to become the Cleveland Guardians. I think it's a great name. I was kind of hoping for the Cleveland Spiders because that's what they were called before they got their current name. But they're changing it to the Guardians after the Guardians of Traffic on the bridge there in Cleveland. And I think it's a really cool name. I'm glad they're changing the name, and I'm glad that they're changing it to the Guardians. And also, yeah, the Elks were previously the Eskimos, and now they're the Elks. I think that's great too. I like changing racially insensitive names of sports teams to something more acceptable. I think that's really cool, and I think that those are both really cool names. So I'm 100% behind it. Um, John also says, I learned that Tom Hanks was up for the role of Zephram Cochrane in First Contact, but I really enjoyed James Cromwell's performance. Thought, yeah, I would rather have Cromwell. I mean, Tom Hanks is Tom Hanks. I mean, I wouldn't not want to have him in a movie, but I don't know. I think Cromwell played that Cochrane with a little bit more of an edge. I think if Tom Hanks had played Cochrane, he would have been more like he was when we saw a glimpse of him in the original series. Um, and that might have worked, but for that sort of more harsh, more a little bit more of an edge to him version of Cochrane, I think James Cromwell was the better choice. And before I get to your latest super chat, John, I do want to acknowledge some of the other people who are asking questions. Some random geek asks, should I watch the old school He-Man instead of the new He-Man? I have to. I have watched old animated shows before. You don't need to watch it. Like you won't be lost if you haven't watched the old one and you watch the new one. Like you don't have to. In fact, I was talking on the phone with Jason earlier, and he was not really a big fan of the original He-Man. So when he watched the new He-Man show on Netflix today, I think he enjoyed it more than I did. And this isn't the only reason that he enjoyed it more than I did, but I think one of the reasons he enjoyed it more than I did was that because he isn't as familiar with it, he wasn't as annoyed as I was by all of the nerdy little references, you know? Like there are, especially in the first episode of the new He-Man, there are so many little wink, wink, get it references to other versions of He-Man, and it just gets fucking annoying. There's just way too much of it. It goes from, oh, okay, I get it, to Jesus Christ, stop it. It gets almost compulsive at one point. If you don't know the reference and you don't recognize it as such, then that probably won't bother you. So in a way, not having been as familiar with the old cartoon may actually help you enjoy the new one better. But no, you definitely don't need to have watched it. Um, and John, okay, now John has another super chat. Thank you very much. Asks, how was the animation quality of He-Man improved? Oh yeah, improved from the original, from the filmation. Yeah, way better. The animation was good. The character designs were good. I think aesthetically it was fine. It was quite good. And yeah, I mean, in terms of animation quality, yeah, way better than the filmation one for sure. And then another one from John says, final one. Thank you very much for all the super chats as always, John. Why are sci-fi screenwriters so unimaginative? Aliens arrive in our solar system and don't look at the asteroid belt and say cool ammo. I think it's probably a byproduct of screenwriters or Hollywood writers, and not just writers, but producers and filmmakers in general are not that creative. And Hollywood doesn't really incentivize creativity. Unfortunately, I wish that it did. I wish that it incentivized it more than it does. But you know, there there is a lot of lowest common denominator, stuff that has gotten away with in Hollywood because there isn't as much of an incentive to get past it. So it's not just sci-fi, but I think because sci-fi is such a singular genre, it kind of stands out more. Um, Oh, and I just got a new channel member. So thank you to James Miller for joining the channel as a member at the 99-cent store level. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And a super chat from Jimmy Hutchison, who says, why do you always have or wear an ink pen at your collar? Now, this is a good question. So the ink pen is something that I used to wear uh, for in case I needed like to sign a receipt or something, so that I just had a pen. And I almost always wear t-shirts, so I don't have a pocket to put it in. So I would just clip it to my collar. So I'd always have a pen. But now that you don't really have to, like signing receipts or signing checks or whatever isn't as common of a thing anymore. And also, like, if you're at a restaurant, they usually give you a pen, so I don't need the pen. But I got into the habit of carrying it because I liked the security of having a pen in case I needed one. And I just got used to carrying it. So now I carry it. Pretty much, it's part of when I get dressed in the morning. I put on my shirt and I clip my pen in the collar. So at this point, it's basically an affectation. It's just a habit that I got into, and I just wear it because of that. And also, the pen itself is really cool. It's a space pen. It's an astronaut pen. So it has a pressurized um, ink capsule. That's the ink capsule that's there, and it has CO2 in the ink capsule, so it's under pressure, so that it can write in zero gravity, and you always get a nice, thick, smooth line, even if you're writing in zero gravity. Which I've never tried it out because I've never been in zero gravity, but I trust the manufacturer that it would actually work, and it was developed for astronauts to use in space, and now I have one, which makes me just the same as an astronaut. Okay, some super chats coming in. Thank you all very much for the super chats, by the way. I really appreciate it. Stephen Fenn says, I apologize on behalf of Relic 5000 for asking that horrible question. I'm Canadian, is what we do. I'll come up with a better one next week. Please don't. It's just it's difficult for me to answer those questions. Like, that's the thing. It's not so much that it's like an innately bad question. It's just it doesn't interface with my points of interest when it comes to Star Trek, and for me they're really difficult questions to ask because it's not where my interest lies, and it's not the way I sort of approach it. So that's the problem, but it's not a bad question, and I hope I didn't make anybody feel bad about that. Kirok 2011, another super chat. Thank you very much, my friend. Says, hey, Steve, this is about He-Man, of course. One of my many complaints is Alan Oppenheimer, who voiced the original Skeletor, does voice acting, and that's one of two. Did you post the other one? I guess you haven't posted the other one yet. Here's the second one. Alan Oppenheimer voices Mossman, but not Merman or Skeletor like he did in the original. Yeah. Is he Mossman or is he Beastman? I guess he is Mossman, isn't he? Yeah, now that I think about it. But I mean, maybe it's a function of his age, because he is in his upper 80s now, isn't he? Maybe he just didn't, either he wasn't up for it physically or just he didn't want to. But I mean, as much as I like Mark Hamill's Skeletor, I mean, of course, if it were possible, and if Alan Oppenheimer was up for it and wanted to, I mean, I would have loved to have him do the voice of Skeletor, because that's Skeletor to me. Mark Hamill Skeletor is good, but Alan Oppenheimer Skeletor is that's the guy. Like, ha ha ha, He-Man. That's Skeletor. I'll get you next time, He-Man. Or King Randor, come in, you royal boob. Like, that's Skeletor to me. That's the voice. So yeah, I agree with you. I kind of, if circumstances and willingness, permitted, I would have liked to have Alan Oppenheimer do it too. Kemp Chalmers with the super chat asking, are we getting a Loaxana Trek actually anytime soon? I'm not sure. It's going to be in the poll for a while unless it finishes last place. It'll stay in the poll, and if it wins the poll, it'll win. It'll be after that. But if it's longer than a few months and it doesn't look like it's winning the poll, I might just go ahead and do it, because I've done that before. If I really want to do the video, or I just want to get it out of the way and it's not winning the poll, I might go ahead and do it just as a bonus video that month. So I would expect in the next few months, maybe, but I don't want to make any promises or give any sort of concrete projection, but it's coming soonish. Yeah. And another one from Kirok 2011 says, Alan Oppenheimer still sounds like Skeletor when he wants, he still does cons, and a few of the recent ones are available on YouTube. Yeah, I'm sure he does. But it's probably a little different doing a couple of lines at a con versus being in a recording studio for a few hours, to record for a show. Knit and Crochet Tiger says, my uncle called me racist against black people because I hate Trump. I am a cis gay white man. My uncle doesn't know that I had dated one woman that was black and I voted Obama twice. Yeah, well, those two don't go together. You're racist against black people because you don't like Trump? I think your uncle is confused, my friend. I think your uncle is confused. 255 AD says, the very first question that was submitted had two parts in it, and you only answered the second part. I will make you see this if it kills me. I'm sorry. Did I miss that? I didn't intentionally try to miss the, you mean the first part, the first question in my my patron questions? What was the one that I missed? Oh, if the Enterprise pays a visit to us today, what is the message? Oh shit, I did miss that. You're right. Thank you very much for pointing that out. Um, what would the message be? It would be on the lookout for creeping fascism. The message would be it can happen here. That would be the message. The message would be, oh, don't get too full of yourself because you think you have a nice, decent democratic society. You can fall into fascism quicker than you realize it's happening. That might be the you know um Super chat from Stephen G. Clenard says, if I was writing Voyager, I would have made Harry Kim's failure to get promoted a running gag. Every few episodes would have a comic B plot where Harry catches a complicated scheme to get promoted. And then another one from Stephen following up on that says, also, instead of playing the clarinet, he would play the trombone. I know this is Riker's thing, which he would pull out to play the sad trombone bit after his dreams have once again been dashed. Oh, I wish you had been writing Voyager. I wish you had been writing Voyager. That sounds hilarious. Yes, 255 AD. You did it. John Burns with another super chat says The Rock was a James Bond movie. Agree? I can kind of see that. Yeah, I mean, it had the aged Bond coming out of retirement to break into Alcatraz. Yeah, I could kind of I can if you squint, I can make that work. Welcome to the Rock. Your Alta Trekkie says, I watched Kong Skull Island and Godzilla King of the Monsters last week, and I cannot help. The whole Monarch verse is relatively weak. Why did people hate the 98 Godzilla? Well, I mean, I don't think the 98 Godzilla is a very good monster movie, and it's definitely not a good Godzilla movie. Like, if you're a Godzilla nerd like I am, and you love, the classic Toho movies, there's really not a whole lot there for you. And the special effects were kind of weak. It's all takes place like in the dark with rain, so they can hide how unconvincing the CGI is on Godzilla. This is not a good movie. I don't know. I mean, I have really enjoyed the current MonsterVerse. I think probably Godzilla King of the Monsters is the weakest one, but I didn't think it was terrible. And I think the first Godzilla and Kong Skull Island, and then Kong versus Godzilla I think they've all been really terrific. So I can't really, I just kind of disagree with you there. But I think they're all better than the '98 Godzilla. um, Let me see. Knit and Crochet Tiger says, my uncle is under the impression that he did a lot to give blacks financial help, as well as pardoned hundreds of blacks. I asked him, what was he smoking? Yeah, exactly. Once again, yeah, your uncle is confused. Your uncle is very confused. 255 AD says, going back to my question, do you think I'm right to presume that if we could relatively easily travel to another inhabited planet, we'd exploit the hell out of it? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If there weren't if there wasn't some kind of barrier to stop it, like if the government wanted to, if the United States government wanted to and it was feasible, yeah, we would do it. And if private industry was able to and the government didn't act to stop them, then they would do it. Yeah, I think it's you are right to presume that. And Dana asked, when and why did your favorite color change? I don't remember. I think maybe it changed in my teens as an act of rebellion. I think I might have consciously said to myself, green is no longer my favorite color just because it's my dad's favorite color, or just because it was the color of my dad's truck. That doesn't mean it has to be my favorite color. My favorite color is going to be blue. Like, it was something like that, probably. But I can't remember if there was like a conscious reason why. Crystal Fajman says, how about a gargoyle Star Trek crossover? Riker could be a descendant of David Xanatos. See, there you go. Perfect. There you go. That sounds fantastic. Kemp Chalmers says Star Trek Fast and Furious crossover. Absolutely. Go for it. I mean, I haven't seen the most recent one, but it seems like if the Fast and Furious movies just continue going on their current trajectory, they're going to turn into Star Trek movies before too long on their own anyhow. So Some Random Geek, is the Patron Hangout this Sunday? I believe it is. Yes, it is. The Patron Hangout is this Sunday. Um, and Deralta Trekkie says, you obviously didn't start as a YouTuber. What jobs did you have, and what was the best and what was the worst one? Actually, the only proper job I ever had was working maintenance at a truck stop. I worked there for 5 years, and it had its ups and downs. It was mostly a pretty shitty job, but there were parts of it that I liked. But yeah, the only like long term employment that I had prior to YouTube was that. Um, Liam Foley asks, what are some pros and cons of Trek doing episodic shows versus story arc shows like Discovery and Picard? Well, for me personally, the pro is that more episodic makes it more rewatchable. Because there are times when I feel like only watching an episode or two of something, and I don't want to necessarily have to watch an entire season of television to get the whole story. So that, like, I have not rewatched um, any of Star Trek Discovery since I watched it the first time. Like I watched season one once. I watched season two once. I watched season three once. That's all. Like, and I like the show. Like, I'm not against the show at all. But because it is so serialized, it's difficult to just drop in and watch an episode. Like, and it's difficult to pick out like what episode would I watch. I do remember having favorite episodes of each season, but they're mostly pretty tied into the other seasons. So like, you know, to me, it affects the rewatchability. Now, the con is, and alternatively, the pro of doing storytelling like that and having it be more serialized is that you can tell larger stories. You can tell stories that, there is something satisfying about having something set up in episode one and having it pay off in episode 11 or 12. If you have been able to maintain that for that many episodes, or even setting up something in episode one and having it pay off in episode three or four, you know what I mean? And just doing smaller arcs throughout the season. Like there's value to that kind of storytelling if it's done well. Ideally, I would like to see a Star Trek show that does both. I mean, I'm kind of hoping that Strange New Worlds is a little bit like that, where there are more self-contained episodes, but there are also arcs that carry throughout the season. Because I think that's probably the best way to do it. And that's mostly what Deep Space Nine did. Deep Space Nine got more heavily serialized toward the very end, but for the most part, Deep Space Nine, the episodes are pretty self-contained, but the events of the episodes and the characterization that occurs in the episode are sticky. They carry over from one episode to the next. So it's not as though it's not like what happened in Voyager or or to be fair, what also happened in Next Gen and original series as well, which is once the episode is over, you're back to go, and it starts all over again, and it's like the last episode never happened, you know and you can pretty much watch the episodes in any order, and it doesn't really matter. Deep Space Nine, I feel like, threaded that needle pretty well for the most part, where it's mostly self-contained episodes, but the events matter and carry over, and there are arcs that span many episodes. So I feel like that's the best way to do it. But yeah, there are pros and cons of each for sure. um 255 AD says in some Enterprise eps, they mentioned that around 2100, slow warp ships were sent out to survey near stars. Would you want a show set on one of those really super primitive ships? I think that might, yeah, depending on what this premise is or what the story was. Yeah, absolutely. I think that could be something. One of the things I would love to see, and one of the things that I was hoping we would get more from Enterprise that we didn't really get, was I would love a Star Trek show where it feels like an astronaut show. If that means setting it earlier in the timeline, that's great. If that means just changing the focus or changing the tone of the show, but whatever. I would just, one of the things that I like about Star Trek and that I find appealing about Star Trek is that it is set in our future. It is humanity's future, and that they are explorers. I mean, yes, it's like quasi-military, right? But they are explorers, they're scientists, they're doing things that are not that different than what astronauts are doing on the space station and what astronauts have done in the space program all along, conducting experiments, learning about how things happen in zero gravity, things like that. Like they're the characters in Star Trek, theoretically, when they're doing their jobs, are doing things that are similar to what astronauts are doing today, just in a far more advanced and more fantastic way. And I like that. Like, that's one of the things that makes me like Star Trek more than things like Star Wars, which have more of a fantasy element. And, Star Wars isn't our future, and it's not about astronauts. It's about it's a space western, and it's great, in its own right. But Star Trek is also kind of a space western, but the characters in Star Trek are the inheritors of the legacy of astronauts, and I like that. And I would love to see a Star Trek show that leaned more into that, for sure. Uh, Older Alta Trekkie. I'm very lazy today. Was the dude playing Bonesaw in the Spider-Man movie a real wrestler? If so, who was it? And was he a face or a heel? My friend, not only was that a real wrestler, that was one of the greatest wrestlers who ever lived, by the name of the Macho Man Randy Savage. Yes, absolutely, he was a real wrestler and one of the greatest of all wrestlers. And he was probably mostly a heel if you go back in his career and add up how long he was which, but he could be a great babyface too. I mean, he had some really great babyface runs in his career, but he was probably best known for being a heel and was a great heel. So yeah, that was a real wrestler for sure. Couple of super chats from John Burns that I missed. Tommy Burns made Jack Johnson the first African American heavyweight champ. Tommy said, I'll fight everyone. I don't want the belt if I'm not the best." Yeah, well, it made Jack Johnson the first African American heavyweight champ by getting his ass beat by him. Yeah, I guess he did. And also, John Burns says, "Is it safe to do a review of Leonard Part 6?" You know what? Leonard Part 6 is probably the perfect movie to review because it's such a shitty movie that it gives you all these opportunities to dunk on fucking Bill Cosby. So yeah, you can do a review of Leonard Part 6 and you can talk about what a shitty movie it is, and you can also talk about what a piece of shit human being Bill Cosby is. So, I mean, if that's the approach you take, I think it's, maybe people who are personally close to the issue of sexual assault, who just don't want to talk about Cosby at all, wouldn't enjoy it. But for people who don't have that closeness to it, who don't have that concern, I don't see why there'd be anything wrong with doing a review of Leonard Part 6. John Burns also says, "I'd love to see Riker meet Skeletor on Steve's comic series." Oh. The scales of the figures don't match up, but I could probably fix that. I could come up with something. Let me see. Kurok 2011 suggests as a crossover, Star Trek the animated series meets the original He-Man. Now that would be just about perfect, wouldn't it? And they could use the same planet backgrounds. Because did you ever notice that some of the planets that they visit on Star Trek the animated series look an awful lot like Eternia? Almost like when they got to make He-Man like 10 years after Star Trek, they just reused the same backgrounds. That's weird. Dana asks, what shade of blue? I don't know. I don't have a particular favorite shade of blue. Just blue. Blue's fine. The blue of Christopher Reeve's Superman costume. How about that? Is that a good enough answer for you? Yeah, and John Burns with a super chat pointing out Tommy Burns defended the belt 13 times before he fought Jack Johnson. He mentioned, "I'm not the white champion, I'm the world champion, not a chump." Yeah, no, he does deserve credit for that. For sure. Kurok 2011, yes, TAS was Filmation. Absolutely. Star Trek the animated series was Filmation. How about that? Dana, you knew it. How did you ever guess? How did you know? It's almost like you know me really well or something. Deralta Trekkie says, one thing that really irks me when it comes to matriarchy in a movie, it's always a patriarchy, but gender swapped. Why can't we have a true working matriarchy in our make-believe stories? Maybe you should write one. Yeah. A8T88 says, just point at a random blue thing and say that. Yeah, you know, the color of the lights on my wall. Yeah, sky blue funk. Yeah, exactly. The Superman blue. Christopher Reeve Superman blue. 255 AD says, if the ship can only go warp 2, the entire show could only be set in like one alien star system. Would that be boring? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. It depends on the writing. I mean, you might be able to come up with a show that that isn't based on planet hopping from world to world. That could still be an interesting show. I think you come up with it. It would probably have to be a lot different than a typical Star Trek show, but I mean that that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. Dana, the blue of the NASA logo on my hat. That's a really nice blue. That is a really nice blue. But I think Superman blue. Superman blue. But that's a good that's a good one. Liam says, I thought you didn't care for fantasy films. Isn't He-Man a fantasy show? It kind of is, yeah. But the difference between He-Man and like something like The Lord of the Rings is He-Man, at least the original He-Man, the Filmation 1980s He-Man cartoon. It doesn't take itself at all seriously. It's goofy and fun. It's sort of a mashup of fantasy and sci-fi because there are fantasy elements, but there's also sci-fi stuff. There's spaceships and ray guns and advanced technology, as well as like elves and dragons and wizards and shit. So that mashup I think is really appealing. And yeah, and again, just the overall tone of the show. It's just a fun, silly show that doesn't take itself seriously, that unlike Lord of the Rings, especially like the Lord of the Rings movies, which is the version of it that really is the only version of it that I'm familiar with, that treats it like it's the fucking Bible. It doesn't have those problems. It's a silly show that I think to the degree that it has any self-awareness at all, it's aware of how silly it is. And I think it's much more palatable to me than more sort of serious, portentous fantasy. Yeah, Black Cover 95. Star Wars is another good example. Yes, Star Wars is also fantasy, but Star Wars is fun. Star Wars is an adventure. Star Wars is a romp. And yes, it does have serious themes and serious moments and characters that, if you love it, characters that you can get really invested in. But overall, tonally, like it's not constantly trying to convince you that it's like super important, which I feel the Lord of the Rings films are doing, and just makes me go like that. But yeah, the tone and approach to the material is very important to me. Yeah. Homebody asks, apropos of nothing, what does one do when one cannot forgive those who have really viciously hurt one? Society says forgive even if they've caused irreparable damage. I do not think that anybody is under any obligation to forgive anybody else. Sometimes society tells you to forgive because that is the easiest way to get back to a place of comfort for other people. And if you are the person who is being asked to forgive and you cannot find it in your heart to forgive, or you just don't want to forgive them, I don't think you are ever under any obligation to do that. And I don't think you should ever feel like that. Forgiveness is a very personal thing. Forgiveness can be a wonderful, powerful, cleansing thing if you are able and willing to do it. But you should never feel like you are expected to, or that it is something that, is imposed upon you, because then it's not true forgiveness anyway. Then you're just play acting. So, I mean, what should you do instead? I don't know. Hopefully find a way to deal with it and live with it without forgiving the person. But, if society says forgive, even if they've caused irreparable damage, and that is not where you're at, then fuck them. You don't need to forgive. And you don't need to try and force yourself to. Super chat from Kirak 2011 says, Steve, you don't like elves. Isn't Spock an elf with a hyperactive thyroid? I know I'm pushing it, but I couldn't help it. But see, that's the thing. People, I think some random geek has pointed that out a lot. And other people have too. That like, aren't Vulcans just space elves? Context really matters. Context is important. And again, things like tone and approach to the material are important. Spock and Vulcans in general. Yeah, they're tall, they're long-lived, they have pointed ears. Like there's a lot of things that Vulcans have in common with like fantasy elf characters. But when I watch Star Trek, I don't think of them as elves. I think of them as Vulcans. And I think, generally speaking, Star Trek avoids most of the problems that I typically have with high fantasy. So I'm more accepting of it, Geraldo Trekkie says, sorry, I had to go early yesterday. So what is your favorite line of Pulp Fiction? And why are people thinking Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta talking about burgers is fun? My favorite line from Pulp Fiction. Oh, okay. My favorite line from Pulp Fiction. It's hard to pick a favorite line, but my favorite exchange of dialogue in Pulp Fiction is it's after Vincent has shot Marvin and the gun goes off and Jules doesn't know what's happening. And he goes, oh, what the fuck is happening? And Vincent turns around and says, oh man, I shot Marvin in the face. And Jules says, why the fuck did you do that? And Vince is like, I don't know. The car must have run over a bump or something. And Jules says, hey, the car didn't hit no motherfucking bump. And they go back and forth for a little bit. And then Vince says, I can't believe this. And Jules says, well, believe it now, motherfucker. We got to get this car off the road. Cops tend to notice shit like you're driving a car drenched in fucking blood. And I think that might be my favorite line because it's like his excitement and his panic are so understandable and just tangible in that moment. And it's just such a frank line that just falls out of his mouth. It's just like, well, cops tend to notice it like you're driving a car drenched in fucking blood. I love it. I love it. And the lines that you guys are putting in the chat are all great too. Yeah, absolutely. Zed's dead, baby. Zed's dead. That's great. We should have shotguns for this deal. That's great. Yeah, there's so many great lines in Pulp Fiction, but I think the ones I just quoted are my favorites. 255 AD says, do you think that would piss off fans an entire season exploring one or two planets, or would they be fine with it as long as there aren't too many people of color? Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. Would it piss off fans? I don't fucking care. If it's a good show, I don't care if it pisses off fans or not. Fuck them. If they get pissed off at a good show, fuck them. And if they get pissed off at too many people of color, fuck them twice. I mean, fuck, you know what I mean? But I mean, it might, it might alienate. If they have like a very, very specific and narrow view of what Star Trek is supposed to be, then it might piss them off. Just like it pissed off some people when Deep Space Nine was set mostly on a space station instead of a starship. Well, that's not Star Trek. Or when Voyager was set on a ship that got lost in the Delta Quadrant and had was mostly separated from Starfleet and had a woman in charge. Well, that's not Star Trek. Yeah, it'll probably piss off some fans, but as long as it's a good show, who gives a fuck? Kirak with another super chat says, "Oh, I wasn't actually comparing elves to Vulcans. I was just being sassy." Oh, you. And then also another one from Kirak 2011 that says, oh no, that was the one I just saw about elves. Never mind. Cheyenne Wright says, in Superman 3, the asshole soup suit is the exact same colors of suit that Zack Snyder used for his Snyderverse. In the realm of color theory, Zack is telling us my Superman is evil. I don't think Zack's that fucking smart, but that is a great point. Yes, you're right. It is interesting that in Superman 3, one of the things they do to indicate that Superman is turning evil is they darken the blue of his suit. and they desaturate. So the red in the S in the cape is not as bright, and the blue is darker. That yeah, and of course, yeah, it's much closer to the color scheme of the costume in the Snyder movies. That's yeah, that's a very very astute observation. Um, John Byrne says, another super chat, thank you very much, says, if Othello is played by a white actor, is it okay if Iago is played by a person of color? Um, I think you are describing Patrick Stewart's production of Othello. Patrick Stewart did a production of Othello where he played Othello and they just reversed the races so that Othello was the only white character and the other characters uh, were all played by black actors. And that was how because Patrick Stewart, he said, I really wanted to play Othello, but it was unacceptable to do blackface. I didn't want to do blackface like fucking Olivier did. Patrick Stewart wasn't doing it, but he said, so we'll flip the races so that Othello is white and I can play him and the other characters will be black. So I think so. It's not just a matter of, well, a white guy played Othello, therefore it's okay for black people to play whatever. I mean, like you're addressing it in a broader sense. You know what I mean? Um, I don't think there's any problem with a person of color playing Iago necessarily. I think, I mean, you know, it depends on the production and the director and how it's approached. But I don't think there's. I mean, if you can justify Othello being played by a white guy, I think you can justify Iago being played by a black guy for sure, or a person of color, not necessarily a black guy, but a person of color. Um, Draw to Trekkie, I say let Iago be played by a parrot. That would never work. Um, Draw to Trekkie says, so I watched 3 versions of Charlie's Angels now. The classic show, the movies out of the 2000s, and the movie with Kristen Stewart and Jean-Luc. What's your favorite? I have not seen any of them. I have never watched a single episode of the Charlie's Angels show, and I've never watched any of the movies, so I'm afraid I cannot help you, my friend. David Colby says, I now understand racist fans. I got the role-playing game for Homeworld, a setting I enjoy immensely, but there are way too many white people in the art. And it's like, I get it now. Imagine if I were racist and I were looking at a bunch of people of color. I would hate that. Gerald Trekkie says, since you were subtle about it, might it be that you didn't like Nemesis? Why? I mean, you called it a shitty movie, but what made it a shitty movie? It felt like it had a lot of ideas that were borrowed from other past Star Trek movies and TV episodes. I didn't feel like it had a whole lot creatively of its own to offer. I felt like a lot of the characters, especially Captain Picard, were written totally out of character from how they had been established, even just in the previous films, let alone the the TV series. I thought it had the whole thing. It had a very, especially the writing had a very amateurish kind of fanboy-y fanfic quality to it. It didn't seem like it was written by, and it was written by John Logan, who is an acclaimed award-winning screenwriter. But I think it might be an example of when I say sometimes the best writer is someone who is not a huge fan of the material, because John Logan is a huge Trekkie, and I think maybe he was a little too close to it, and he wrote a Star Trek story that he thought would please Star Trek nerds like him instead of writing a good story, you know, and I think that comes across. And I mean, and also, I just don't think it's very well directed. Like, it was directed by Stuart Baird, who is more commonly known as an editor and is very well regarded as an editor, like is the kind of editor that other editors want to be like is a highly regarded film editor. Not so much of a director, a very boring kind of by the numbers director. And there are scenes in Nemesis that are like big action scenes that just kind of lay there. Like the one that I noticed from the first time I saw the movie was when Picard and Data are escaping from the Romulan ship, and like they're flying the little Romulan fighter shuttle down the hallway. They're flying a ship in the corridor of the Romulan ship, and they're like shooting their way out, bursting out. And it's I remember watching that in the theater and thinking to myself, like, this should be incredibly exciting, and it's just not. It's just dull. It's not, you know, very well done action at all. It just, like I said, it just kind of lays there, and it should be this amazing pulse pounding sequence, and it's just not. So, and like there's a huge fight at the end between Commander Riker and the Viceroy of Shinzon that has no reason to be there other than it's just something to give Riker something to do. It's like they realize Riker is an important character, but they didn't have anything for him to do in the story. So they said, fuck it, let's just have him have a fight for 15 minutes. And just a badly written, badly put together movie. It's just a shitty movie. I think it's the worst Star Trek movie by quite a ways. Like I don't think it's even close. Like people say Star Trek 5 or Generations, and I mean Generations is a shitty movie too. Uh, Star Trek 5 is also a shitty movie, but I enjoy it. Like it's shitty in kind of a fun, endearing way. But like Nemesis is easily the worst Star Trek movie. Like it's not even close. Um, Kirak 2011 says, last He-Man comment for the night, but another complaint was the handling of certain characters like He-Man, Prince Adam slash Orko and Roboto. I think you're trying to say they're not Roberto, Roboto. um, waiting for part two. Well, I'm waiting for part two from Kirak. Liam Foley says, speaking of tone, the DCEU is pretty dark for the most part. The MCU strikes a good balance between drama and humor. Should the DCEU adopt that kind of tone? Yeah. I mean, maybe not the exact same tone. Like, I don't think the DCEU needs to be like copying the MCU so much, but I would love for them to adopt a less. It's not just that it's dark, it's that it's so full of itself. It's so up its own ass. It's like, it's one of those because Zack Snyder, I think, is one of those filmmakers, and for better or worse, he kind of set the tone for the DCEU, and the good films in the DCEU are the ones that defy that tone, like Shazam, or to a lesser extent, the Wonder Woman movies, or the Birds of Prey movie was a great example of that as well. It has a completely different tone than most of the rest of the DCEU and succeeds fabulously. Um, yeah, it has confused grim and dark with like deep and serious and sophisticated, and this like there's nothing remotely sophisticated about Zack Snyder's filmmaking, and but it's dark and gritty, and the people give like important sounding soliloquies, so therefore it's an important serious movie, and yeah, the faster they get away from that shit, the better. Anyway, second part of Kirak's question, the way they handled certain characters like He-Man and Prince Adam and Orko and Roboto. To quote Sipowicz, if you catch my drift, didn't want to spoil to the room just yet, and I was hopeful up to the last 5 minutes, started and ended bad. I know I see what you're getting at, and I also don't want to spoil anything. I did not have a problem with that in theory, but I think the way it was handled was not good. The idea of what they do with those characters is fine. Like I don't object to the way they handled those characters in theory, but the way they executed it, I don't think worked. No. So I hopefully that answers your question without spoiling it for anybody who hasn't seen it. Toronto Trekkie says, since you're a Scotty Back superfan, did you watch NCIS New Orleans? No, I have never watched that. Actually, I've seen a little bit of one episode because it was on in the waiting room of the the garage when I went to get my truck fixed last year. I think I got new brakes put on my truck or something. I had to get some kind of maintenance done on my truck, and while I was waiting for it, the TV in the waiting room was playing an episode of NCIS New Orleans. So I saw it through that, but I've never actually watched it on my own. I guess my Scotty Backs fandom doesn't carry me that far. It doesn't carry me to nondescript CBS procedurals. John Burns with a super chat says, there's a director who directed an episode of Dark Matter. I think her name is Melanie Orr. She uses Lego to storyboard her scenes. Super cool or what? Yeah, that is really cool. I've never heard of that. But that is really cool to use Lego to do storyboards instead of drawing them. Because, a lot of directors who work on storyboards, like, I don't know if you've ever seen a Martin Scorsese storyboard, but they look like, I mean, it's just it's unintelligible. I mean, you can barely make out the figures, and it's It's like, okay, this guy's going to be here, and this guy's going to be here, and this is going to be here in the foreground. It's like he sketched it with his non-dominant hand, blindfolded. Just like right there. That's the storyboard. It's it's quite something. But but it does what it needs to do. Like a storyboard doesn't necessarily have to be a work of art. It just needs to do what you need it to do as a director. So yeah, but using Lego is really cool. Um, 255 AD says, I don't get the point of writing about an anarchist society if it's not positive. Like, who needed to be told anarchism might not work perfectly in the US in the Cold War? Well, that's not necessary. I mean, you don't necessarily have to write against anarchism. If Le Guin was an anarchist, and it's totally, reasonable for her to write a story that puts anarchism in a positive light. I don't think it's necessarily fair to criticize the book for that. But it doesn't, it doesn't mean that I have to look, happily upon it. Like I said, there were aspects of the way she treated it that I appreciated, but whenever one of the anarchist characters, usually Shevik, would start going off about how great life was on Anarish, or how much better their lives were there than on the other planet, or when he would get up on his high horse and beat his chest about, like, oh, how dare you judge me when you have laws? We don't have laws. You, like, having laws is just the worst thing ever. That I roll my eyes at that because I just think that's dumb. But it's not necessarily a bad thing to be, if you're an anarchist and you're writing a story that is set in an anarchist society, like I would expect it to be more or less positive toward anarchism. It doesn't mean that I have to like it, but I don't have a problem with that. Kirak 2011 asks, speaking of all these remakes, got me to wonder, have you ever seen the Transformers 1986 animated film? Yeah, absolutely. I think I saw that back at the time when I was a kid. I watched it. Yeah, that was huge. That was huge for sure. Serratum Geek says, anarchism is against rulers, not rules. Well, then somebody should tell Shevik, because he seemed pretty anti-rule, or at least he seemed anti-law. I'll put it. He seemed like anti-formalized rule. Yeah. No, Data. I did like the Dispossessed. I liked the Dispossessed. I didn't like the. I don't think my opinion has changed from when we did the series about. I overall I liked it quite a lot, actually. But the soapboxing about anarchism, I think that's when I would go, like, okay, come on. But overall I thought it was a really good book. I liked it a lot. Oh, I see what you're saying, 255AD. Why wasn't it more positive? I mean, why wasn't Le Guin more positive? Given the fact that she was an anarchist. I think for the story. I think it's a better book. I mean, she, first and foremost, she's a storyteller, and that's one of the reasons why it is good. Because she does put the story first. It's not as didactic as it might have been, because she chooses story and character ahead of the argument she's making or the ideology that she's promoting, usually, for the most part. Sometimes I feel like the ideology steps to the front, and then my disagreement with the ideology steps in, and I'm like, oh, okay, come on. But I think the reason why it has a more critical view of anarchism than you might expect from an anarchist author is because that makes it a better story, and it makes it feel less didactic and less editorial, so that you can actually get into the story for the characters and for what's happening and get invested in what's going on, and not feel like you're constantly being beaten over the head with, but what about anarchism? Anarchism is better. We should have an anarchist society. It's so much better. You know what I mean? Like, if that was the book, then I wouldn't have enjoyed it. But I enjoyed it quite a bit because it was more than that. It was telling a compelling story. So I mean, and again, I can't read Le Guin's mind. I don't know if that's consciously why she did it, but I would guess that was why, because she wanted to tell a story first and foremost. Yeah, homebody, exactly. Nuance is a thing. Exactly. Nuance is a thing. Oh, Ghost Wheel. This is a good question. I'm going to answer Ghost Wheel's question. Then it's after 8, so I'm going to answer Ghost Wheel's question and then call it a night because I haven't had dinner yet, you guys, and I still need to do an hour on my exercise bike. So I'm going to have a busy night. But home or a Ghost Wheel says, which of all your action figures behind you is your favorite, and which do you think would kill you in your sleep? So I'm going to go with the Star Trek ones because there's a Batman and a Catwoman here too, and those are both very high on my favorites list. I love them both. But my favorite is obviously the Commander Riker one. Let me go get. So let me see. Okay, so my favorite is the Commander Riker one, who you have seen if you read my Star Trek comics. Riker is usually the star of those, so he's my favorite. The one that would kill me in my sleep is probably Garrick, because that just seems like the kind of shit he would pull. I just think of all of the characters that I have these figures of, the one most likely to kill somebody in their sleep is Garrick. So there you go. Favorite is Riker. Most likely to kill me in my sleep is Garrick. That is it, everybody. I'm going to call it a night. As Some Random Geek pointed out just now in the live chat, please don't forget the charity links, charitylinks.page. They're linked in the description of this video. And if you have a few bucks to spare and you can help out some friends of ours who need a helping hand, please do that. They would appreciate it and I would appreciate it. Derogatory, yes, Catwoman probably could kill me in my sleep as well. But yeah, and 255, yeah, Garrick's outfit on this action figure is terrible. It's not a good costume for the figure. But in fact, I think one of the times I had him appear in the comic, I actually changed the color in the GIMP in my photo editor because I thought, like, why does he have that fucking shit mustard yellow? Garrick's more stylish, and that's why I changed the color to a bit of a green. I think it looked a little bit better that way. But anyway, don't forget the charity links. Don't forget, if you want to support my work, you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives, or by becoming a channel member by clicking the join button down there. And channel members at the $5 a month level, and also patrons who support me at $5 a month or more, are eligible or get shout outs at the end of Trek Actually videos. And patrons and members of any amount get access to the forums where they can submit questions for Ask Away ahead of time. And they also get to vote in polls to choose new Trek Actually topics. And they get the opportunity to join me once a month for a live video call. I used to call it a hangout, but I guess technically it's not a hangout, but it's still kind of a hangout. A live video hangout once a month, which the next one is this weekend, this Sunday at noon Eastern time is the next hangout for patrons and members. So if you are a patron or a member at any level, you have at least a chance to get in there. It's first come, first serve. And I usually lock the meeting after there's 13 of us in total in there. But yeah, so that's another perk of being a member. And also, if you like what I do on this channel, you should be listening to the podcasts that I am a co-host on. There's the Late Seating podcast, which is the movie review podcast that I do with Jason Harding. And there's also the Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed improv comedy podcast that I do with Jason and Dana, who is watching with us and is in the chat. And on that one, we play low-ranking officers serving aboard the TNG era Enterprise. And our episodes sort of take place in the meantime and in between time of actual episodes of the series. We're currently set in the first season of Star Trek TNG. That's where our characters are kind of living. And it's been a good season so far. It's been a lot of fun. And hopefully, if you have been listening, you think it's been a fun season. And if you haven't been listening, it's a good time to jump aboard. So you can listen to Late Seating and the Ensign's Log at letmelistenpodcasts.com or through the links in the description of the video. And I would encourage you to check out both of them. And if you're here because you watch me do videos about Star Trek stuff, I think you would especially enjoy the Ensign's Log. So there you go. That's it, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining me. Thank you for watching. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you for the super chats. Those of you who were generous this evening, I really, really appreciate it. And that's it. I will see you this weekend for the patron hangout. And then I will see you next week. And Ghost Wheel, you're absolutely right about Dana. She will totally tell me if I'm full of shit. that's that's one of the many wonderful things about her. So anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching. See you next time, everybody. Take care.